On my 75th birthday, I bought a small cake towshare. My son Robert took it, laughed, and threw it on the floor. He looked at me and said, "Eat it, stupid." The room filled with their laughter. I did not cry. I did not shout. I sat very still and watched every face. They thought they had crushed me. They did not know I still kept the papers and keys that mattered. By morning, something happened that shocked everyone. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and please subscribe. It was supposed to be a small celebration. Just family, candles, and quiet laughter. I had saved a little from my pension, enough to buy a cake and a few paper decorations. 75 years isn't youth, but it's still a heartbeat worth honoring. I pressed my best shirt, the one my late wife once said, made me look sharp for an old man. I walked to my eldest son Robert's house with the cake balanced carefully in my hands, its icing trembling with every step. I thought they would smile. I thought maybe for one evening, love would outweigh convenience. When I arrived, the room was loud with guests, his friends, not mine. Music thundered from speakers, beer bottles clinked. My son Robert saw me, standing there in the doorway, holding that little cake like a peace offering. His eyes rolled. "Dad," he said, voice dripping with impatience, "you didn't need to come. We're busy." I smiled anyway. I told him it was my birthday, that I only wanted to spend it with family. A few people turned to look. Confused. My other son smirked, embarrassed that the old man was stealing his attention. I placed the cake on the table. It wasn't fancy, just a round vanilla cake with white frosting and 7 candles. I had written my own name on it with shaky icing. "Happy birthday, Walter." My grandchildren stared, whispering. My daughter-in-law looked away. My son Robert laughed. "What, you bought your own cake?" he asked loudly, making sure everyone heard. Laughter rippled through the room. I felt it crawl over my skin like heat. I said softly, "I didn't want to trouble anyone." He came closer, towering over him, that cruel grin still spreading. "You shouldn't have," he said. Then before I could even answer, he picked up the cake, both hands, and threw it down on the floor. It landed with a wet thud, frosting splattering across my shoes. The candles flickered, one still burning on its side. The room erupted in laughter. I stood there frozen. For a second, my mind went blank. No anger, no sadness, just a cold kind of clarity. My son Robert's voice sliced through the noise. "If you want it so bad, old man, eat it from the floor." More laughter followed. Deep, cruel, drunk. Someone even clapped. My knees wobbled, but I didn't fall. I just looked at him. Looked at my own flesh and blood. The boy I hadn't carried on my shoulders, now looking down at me like I was dirt. The sound of laughter faded behind my ears. All I could hear was my heart. Slow, heavy, steady. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just nodded, turned around, and walked out the door. The night air hit my face like water after fire. I walked home alone under the streetlights, each one flickering as if it too wanted to look away. When I reached my empty house, the silence was almost merciful. I sat at the kitchen table, crumbs of dignity still clinging to my shoes, and I thought about every sacrifice that led to that moment. The mortgage I paid, the college tuition, the loans, the gifts, the endless second chances. I had built their world piece by piece, and now I saw what they'd done with it. I lit one candle from the broken cake, set it on a saucer, and whispered a promise to myself. "You will never humiliate me again." The next morning, the laughter still rang in my ears. I could hear it even before I opened my eyes, a sound that didn't fade, a sound that burned. People say humiliation passes, but they're wrong. It settles in the bones. It lingers like a smell you can't wash off. I sat at the table, staring at the single candle I had kept from the cake. Its wax hardened overnight, and I knew something inside me had changed forever. That night, when my son Robert threw the cake, something else happened too. Something quiet but sharp. Every guest who laughed showed me who they truly were. It wasn't just his friends. My own 8 other sons smirked. My daughter-in-law covered her mouth to hide a smile. Even the neighbors I'd helped for years pretended not to see what was happening. I had become entertainment, the old man who outlived his usefulness, the relic who didn't know when to stop showing up. The floor had been sticky with sugar and shame. I remember looking down at that cake. The frosting smeared across the tiles, the candles crushed and sputtering, and for a moment, I almost believed I deserved it. That's what years of giving without thanks does to you. It trains you to take disrespect as if it were love in disguise. But as I watched the candlelight die against the floor, something inside me went still, not broken. Still, like ice forming where warmth used to be. After I left, I walked home through the dark streets. The night was cold and cruel clear. I passed the bakery where I had bought the cake, its windows glowing soft yellow. The baker, a kind man who had once given my son free pastries when he was small, waved from inside. I didn't wave back. I just kept walking. When I reached home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark for hours, listening to the tick off the wall clock, letting every second burn into my memory. I thought of my late wife. Her voice, her hands, her patience. She had warned me years ago, "You give them too much," she'd said. "One day they'll forget who gave it." I used to laugh when she said that. I thought she was being too cautious, too protective, but she'd seen something I hadn't. the quiet rot that grows in ungrateful hearts. At dawn, I walked to the mirror. The man staring back at me looked older than I remembered. His face was lined with decades of sacrifice, his eyes dull but steady. I whispered to him, "Enough." Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Later that day, I went to the park, the same one where I used to push my son on the swings. The benches were wet with morning dew, and the pigeons pecked at crumbs left by strangers. I sat there for a long time thinking about the boy he once was, how he used to hold my hand and say, "Don't let go, Dad." Somewhere along the way, he had. By evening, the anger had cooled into clarity. I realized something important. Humiliation is only permanent if you let it be. I had spent my life building things, houses, businesses, futures, and in the end, all that work still belonged to me. My son's laughter hadn't destroyed me. It had reminded me of what I still controlled. When I got home that night, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an old binder, one filled with deeds, account papers, investment documents, and share certificates. My name was still on every line. My signature still carried weight. They had mocked me for being old, but what they didn't understand was this: age doesn't erase ownership. It protects it. I ran my fingers over the papers, each one a quiet weapon of truth. They thought I was powerless. They thought I'd eat cake off the floor and bow my head. They had no idea that in humiliating me, they had signed the end of their own comfort. I closed the folder gently and smiled for the first time that day. Tomorrow the world would still laugh at me. But the day after they would stop, because when silence moves, it doesn't warn you. It destroys quietly. That night, silence became my only companion. No phone calls, no apologies, not even a text. They had humiliated me in public, and by morning, they carried on as if nothing had happened. To them, it was just another joke. A moment of laughter over drinks already forgotten, but to me it was the night something sacred died. I had forgiven them for their laziness, for their greed, for the years they ignored me, except when they needed help. But this was different. This wasn't neglect. It was contempt. And once Amin sees contempt in his child's eyes, something in him hardens forever. I didn't leave my house for 2 days. The laughter from that evening replayed in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cake splattering on the floor. The frostings mirrored across my shoes, the faces grinning through the smoke of the candles I had lit with trembling hands. I kept asking myself, where did I go wrong? I gave them everything. I built the roof above their heads. I paid for their weddings. I saved them from their own mistakes more times than I could count. Yet, when it was my turn for a moment of grace, they gave me humiliation. On the third morning, I got dressed slowly, carefully. I pressed my shirt, brushed my hair, and looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't broken. He was awake. For 75 years, I had lived like a man trying to prove his worth. Now, I didn't need to prove anything. I only needed to remember. I walked outside, the air cold but clean. The street was quiet, just the way I liked it. I stopped by the bench near my gate, the one my grandchildren used to sit on when they visited. I ran my hand over the wood and smiled faintly. They hadn't come by in months. They had their father's arrogance now, the same blindness that mistakes kindness for weakness. That blindness would cost them everything. Back inside, I made tea and sat at the table where I used to share meals with my wife. The chair beside me was empty, but I could almost hear her voice. She used to say, "When pride grows louder than love, let silence answer it." I finally understood what she meant. Revenge didn't need rage. It needed patience. Quiet patience. The kind that builds and waits until the right moment. The silence that followed wasn't loneliness anymore. It was preparation. I went through old drawers, boxes, and filing cabinets. Every piece of paper I touched told a story. Bank accounts, property deeds, business shares. I had signed everything in their favor years ago because I trusted them. But they had made a mistake. They never checked how much power I still had. They never bothered to understand that some things don't transfer fully until the man who built them is gone. I flipped through those documents for hours, sipping my tea, steady hands moving across decades of ink and trust. Every line, every clause, every signature led to one conclusion. The empire they thought was theirs still answered tome. That realization brought peace, not anger. I didn't shout. I didn't curse their names. I simply smiled. Because power doesn't always look like youth or noise. Sometimes it looks like an old man with a pen and a clear mind. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in years. No dreams, no laughter echoing through the dark, just calm. By the next morning, I had a plan not to punish them. Punishment is too short-lived. I wanted balance. They had taken my dignity in front of strangers. I would take their comfort in front of the world. The silence that followed humiliation became my greatest weapon. While they laughed, I had listened. While they mocked, I had prepared. They didn't know it yet, but the man they told to eat from the floor had spent his entire life building a kingdom that could crumble in a single day if he chose. And now I was ready to choose. When dawn came, the decision was already made. There was no rage in me, no tremor in my hands, no heat in my chest, only a stillness so sharp it could cut glass. That's when you know a man means every word, when he stops shaking. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at my old desk, and looked at the documents I had gathered through the night. For years, I had signed their comfort into existence. Business shares, house titles, joint accounts, properties bought in my name and gifted to them. They thought the world belonged to them. They didn't know every thread still ran back to me. It's funny how arrogance blinds the young. They see an old man and think weakness. They see silence and think surrender. They never realize that age doesn't soften power, it sharpens it. Every deal they ever made, every property they flaunted, every car they drove, all of it came from my hand. My name sat quietly on every paper, a ghost signature waiting for its moment. And now it had come. I had given them everything once. Now I would take it all back. I called the bank first. The manager knew me well. We'd met every month for decades. "Mr. Brooks," he said warmly, "I thought you'd retired from all this paperwork." He smiled through the phone. "I did," I told him, "but my sons didn't." He went quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you want the transfers reversed?" "All of them," I said. "Every joint account, every signature, move the funds into my private ledger, effective immediately." There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone understands the weight of what's being asked. Then he said, "It will be done by morning." Next were the properties, 9 of them in total, scattered across Thessaly. Some under their names, some in trusts I had built decades ago. Each one held clauses they'd never bothered to read. Clauses that kept final ownership under my authority until death. And since I was clearly still breathing, I decided it was time to breathe a little life back into my control. I called my lawyer. "Activate every clause," I said. "List all properties for sale." He hesitated. "All of them, sir." "All," I repeated. "No exceptions. Use the private buyers." And while the world woke to routine, my empire began to move quietly, invisibly. Papers shifted. Balances realigned. Emails were sent. What my sons didn't know was that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through phone lines, glides through ink, and rewrites entire futures before breakfast. By noon, I had transferred everything. Funds, deeds, control of businesses, even the vacation property they bragged about online. All of it now rested where it belonged, in my hands. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat back, folded my hands, and looked out the window. The sky was Thessam pale gray as the frosting that hadn't covered my shoes. The humiliation they gave me had turned into something precise, something clean, a kind of justice only the patient understand. That evening I wrote a letter, not to them, to myself. It said, "Today you chose respect over love. You gave them life, and they gave you shame. You don't owe them forgiveness. You owe yourself peace." I sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my wife's photo. She had always said I was too forgiving. I used to tell her that forgiveness made me strong. But now I realized she was right. Forgiveness makes you soft to people who sharpen their cruelty against it. Outside, the street lights flickered to life. I poured another cup of coffee and waited because I knew what tomorrow would bring. Panic, confusion, and fear. They would check their phones, open their accounts, and discover that everything they once mocked me for owning had vanished into thin air. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. And when you spend a lifetime building something for others, you earn the right to decide who deserves to keep it. When a man has spent his entire life signing, building, and providing, he learns something most people never do. Real power doesn't come from fists or shouting. It comes from paper. Quiet, plain legal paper. The kind that doesn't bleed, doesn't argue, and never forgets whose name sits on the last line. I had stacks of it. Deeds, titles, contracts, business registrations, all sleeping quietly under my control. My sons had spent years thinking they were kings, but they had been standing on land I still owned. They lived inside homes I had paid for, drove cars I had leased, and spent from accounts I still governed. That morning I opened the drawer where everything rested and began to work, slowly, calmly. My pen felt heavier than ever, not from age, but from meaning. I went line by line, document by document, underclaimed my name from the empire of arrogance I had built for them. Every piece of paper I touched was like erasing another insult, every signature another answer to the laughter that had once filled that room when they told me to eat cake from the floor. Didn't need anger. I had process. First came the bank accounts, joint accounts, family trusts, savings plans. They had grown fat from my years of discipline, but they still pulsed under my control. I called the bank manager again. "Transfer all remaining assets to my private account," I said. "Mark the secondary holders inactive." He didn't ask why. Maybe he could hear something in my tone. Maybe he knew what it meant when an old man finally decides he's had enough. "It'll be done in the next few hours, sir," he said. "Would you like confirmation notification sent?" "No," I said. "Let them find out the hard way." Then came the homes. I had written the contracts myself years ago, and every clause favored me. I had ensured I retained the right to revoke occupancy or sell at will, just in case. They laughed at me back then, said I was being paranoid. I called their estate lawyer and told him to list every property under my ownership. "Private buyers only," I said. "Fast transactions. Don't haggle." By noon, the first offers started coming in. One for the house my eldest son Robert bragged about online, another for the summer cottage his wife claimed as her peaceful retreat. Each one sold faster than the next. The signatures were digital, the transfers instant. Years of wealth disappeared from their names and returned to mine in less time than it had taken them to humiliate me. I moved on to the business holdings. They never understood how their shares worked, how control could sit quietly behind small numbers. My name didn't need to be in the spotlight to rule the board. It was in the fine print, the kind they never bothered to read. I had made sure of that. By the time they realized their positions as directors would be dissolved, their access revoked, their salaries frozen, they had mocked my old-fashioned habits, my insistence on keeping paper records. They forgot that Papper always wins. Each signature I made felt lighter. My pulse was calm, steady, deliberate. I wasn't destroying what I'd built. I was reclaiming it. In between calls, I looked around my office, the same desk they once leaned on to borrow money, the same chair where they'd promised to pay me back soon. Every object in the room felt like it was watching, remembering. My wife's photo sat on the shelf. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Now you see." By evening it was done. The calls were made, the sales confirmed. The accounts moved. The world I had given them had quietly vanished, swallowed by ink and authority. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars passed. People laughed. Somewhere, my sons probably poured another drink, too self-assured to notice the ground shifting under them. They thought old men moved slow. They forgot we move quiet. The quiet hand of paper is the deadliest weapon a betrayed father can wield. And by sunrise, that hand had written the final chapter of their comfort. The morning they woke was the morning the world turned upside down. I can only imagine how it began one by one in different houses, each of them reaching for their phones with the same easy arrogance they'd worn all their lives. They would have been expecting notifications, maybe business updates or credit alerts. Instead, what they found were warnings. Transaction denied, account restricted, insufficient balance. The screens that once showed comfort now reflected panic. The eldest was probably the first to notice. He'd always been the early riser, the one who believed discipline made him superior. But even discipline can't fill an empty account. He would have called the bank in anger, his voice sharp and entitled. I can almost hear the exchange. "There must be some mistake," he'd say. "This is my account." The clerk, polite but firm, would answer, "I'm sorry, sir. The account has been moved to the primary holder." Silence would follow. The kind that only comes when a man realizes he's been dethroned without warning. The others would have woken soon after. Panic spreads faster than rumor in families built on greed. Calls flew between them before breakfast. "Are your funds showing? Did you authorize anything? Check the deeds. Check the house." Confusion turned to fury. One of them tried to log into the shared business portal, only to find access revoked. Another went to his office and discovered his name erased from the ownership registry. Robert's wife screamed when she saw their mortgage notice had changed hands overnight. By noon, the house that once held their pride was no longer theirs. The new owner's agent had already visited, polite and cold, handing over the eviction date, papers stamped, signatures verified, all legal. They could shout. They could curse, but the law had no sympathy for arrogance. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. I knew exactly how it would unfold. I had built every foundation, written every clause. Their downfall was choreographed like a symphony of quiet ruin, and the conductor didn't need to lift a hand. They must have gathered at me eldest's house, faces pale, clothes wrinkled, all talking at once, blaming one another. "You said you handled the paperwork. You told me we owned it. How could this happen?" Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, one of them, maybe the youngest, would whisper my name. The room would go still. Then slowly the realization would settle over them like a shh. The old man they mocked, the one they made crawl through humiliation, had done this. I wonder how it felt. The moment they realized, I hadn't been powerless, just patient. They had thought wealth was permanent. They had thought their comfort was earned. But they had forgotten one simple truth. Nothing built on disrespect survives. By mid-afternoon, the phone calls began. I didn't answer. I watched the screen light up again and again, each name flashing like a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. I poured myself tea and let it ring. Their panic was music, the same pitch as their laughter that night, only reversed. Soon they arrived at my doorstep, all of them. The same 9 men who had stood around that cake laughing, only now their laughter was gone. Their suits looked tired, their eyes hollowed by disbelief. I could see the fear in their posture. The kind of fear that comes when men realize the person they mocked has rewritten the world without lifting his voice. They pounded on the door, shouting, pleading, "Dad, please open up. This has gone too far." But I stayed seated by the window, calm, watching the afternoon light fade. I didn't need to see them. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. The silence after humiliation, the cold off being ignored by someone you depended on. When they finally stopped knocking, I knew the lesson had landed. Their wealth was gone, their pride stripped, and all I had done was press a few keys and make a few calls. The same hands they once mocked had written their end. That morning they woke as kings. By sunset, they were beggars, and I didn't lift a single finger in anger. By evening, the world had already started whispering. Neighbors peeked through their curtains. Reporters called the lawyers, and word spread faster than they could deny it. 9 proud sons stripped of everything overnight. The story made its way across town in hushed conversations and curious looks. Some said it was a market crash. Others said fraud, but the truth was simpler. Pride finally met the man who built it. I called it balance. From my small house on the hill, I watched the sunset glow over the roofs that no longer belonged to them. The same skyline I had once looked upon with pride was now quiet, humbled, and reset. The balance of power had shifted back to where it began, to the man who built it brick by brick, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. They had mocked my patience, laughed at my silence, but they had never understood it. Silence isn't weakness. It's storage. It's where strength waits until the right moment to move. That day the world learned what it looks like when patience finally collects its debt. Each of my sons tried to explain it away. The bank made a mistake. The lawyers tricked us. Someone hacked the system. They couldn't accept that their own father had been the architect of their collapse. They had spent their lives believing I was too old to think, too kind to fight, too forgiving to retaliate. But there is a special kind of intelligence that comes with time. The kind that doesn't argue, it observes. And when the right moment comes, it doesn't strike, it erases. The press called it the Brooks reversal. They made it sound like an accident, a mysterious shift in ownership. None of them knew that it wasn't chance. It was design, my design. I'd spent my final working years building systems that could outlive me. Foundations, trusts, corporate clauses, and private agreements, all structured around a single rule. Only respect sustains ownership. The moment disrespect appeared, the ownership reverted. Every one of them had signed it. None of them had read it. When the lawyers scalded me that afternoon to confirm the process was complete, I said only 2 words. "Thank you." Then I hung up. I didn't need celebration. The silence that followed was more satisfying than any applause. Across town, chaos reigned. Cars were repossessed, credit lines frozen, properties auctioned off to names they didn't recognize. They shouted at banks, threatened attorneys, begged for explanations, but every signature, every clause, every piece of paper was theirs. They couldn't blame anyone but the mirror. I went for a walk that evening, cane tapping softly on the road. The air smelled of spring, of new beginnings. People who'd once overlooked me now nodded respectfully. They'd read the news. They knew. Some whispered as I passed, "That's him." The old man who outsmarted them all, but I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. As the sky turned gold, I stopped by a small bakery. The same one where I bought the birthday cake that started it all. The owner, a kind man with flour-dusted hands, looked at me in surprise. "You're back," he said. "You want another cake?" I smiled. Not this time," I said. "I just came to say thank you." He laughed softly. "You handled it with class, old friend." Most men would have shouted. I shouted, I said quietly, just not with words. When I got home, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, my sons were learning the kind of hunger I once knew. The hunger that humbles, the hunger that teaches. For the first time in their lives, they would understand the weight of effort, the value of silence, the cost of pride. I didn't destroy them to hurt them. I simply gave them the gift they had refused to give me, perspective. The reversal wasn't revenge. It was restoration. It didn't take long for them to find me. By the 3rd day, all 9 of my sons stood outside my gate, stripped of everything they thought was untouchable. Their cars were gone, their fine suits replaced with yesterday's shirts. Pride had left their eyes. What replaced it was something far quieter. Desperation. The same voices that once barked commands and laughter now trembled like cold wind. I watched them through the window for a long moment, sipping my tea. I had imagined this day so many times, not with anger, but with patience. It had finally arrived. They knocked timidly at first, then louder. "Dad," one of them called. "Please, just talk to us." I didn't answer. They kept shouting my name, voices cracking, words tripping over guilt. When the youngest said, "We're sorry," I almost smiled. The word sorry had never sounded so fragile. I stood up, straightened my shirt, and walked to the door. The hinges creaked as I opened it, slow and deliberate, letting them see me, calm, steady, alive. They froze. For a moment, no one spoke. It was like seeing ghosts. Only I was the ghost they couldn't bury. The eldest, red-eyed and pale, stepped forward. "Father, please," he said, his voice breaking. "You've made your point. We've lost everything. The businesses, the houses, the accounts. It's all gone. But you don't have to do this. We're still your sons." I looked at him at all of them. 9 men I had once carried on my shoulders, now standing like strangers. "Sons," I said quietly. "You remember that word now?" One of them started to speak, but I raised my hand and silence fell. "You laughed while I stood in the middle of the room covered in cake. You told me to eat it off the floor in front of my grandchildren, in front of strangers. You made my birthday a circus. That night, you buried what little respect I had left. And now you come to me because your gold has turned to dust." They stared at the ground. No one dared to meet my eyes. The youngest wiped his face. We didn't mean it like that, he mumbled. He nodded slowly. No, you meant it worse? The eldest stepped forward again. Dad, we'll make it right. We'll start over. Just give us another chance. Start over? I repeated, letting the words hang between us. You started over when you threw my dignity to the floor. I already gave you a lifetime of chances. You wasted every one of them. The angriest suddenly snapped. So this is your revenge. You think taking everything makes you better than us? I looked him dead in the eye. No, it makes me even. The silence after that was heavier than any argument. The truth had landed. I stepped aside and pointed to the ground in front of my porch, the same spot where cake crumbs had once dried into the wood. Do you see that stain? I asked. That's where you told me to kneel. That's where you told me to eat what was left of my pride. So tell me, sons, why should I feed your pride now? None of them spoke. Some turned away. Others began to cry. I sighed, tired more than angry. I didn't do this to destroy you, I said softly. I did it to remind you. Everything you owned was built by these hands. The same ones you mocked for shaking. You forgot who built your comfort. You forgot what respect looks like. So I took it away so you could remember. They begged then quietly, brokenly, asking for forgiveness, asking for mercy. But mercy without respect is wasted. I handed them each an envelope. These are your futures, I said. Inside, there's nothing but a list of what you lost. Read it and understand what it means to earn it. The eldest opened his and froze. Inside, a single sentence was printed on the page. You will never know hunger if you learn humility. I turned, walked back inside, and closed the door. Through the wood I heard sobs. I didn't smile. I didn't feel proud. I just felt done. That night, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels final. I sat in my chair by the window, staring at the lights flickering across the town. Somewhere out there, my sons were wandering the same streets they once ruled, clutching papers instead of power. I could still hear faint echoes of their voices from earlier. The pleading, the disbelief, the shame. It had taken a lifetime to reach that silence. And now that it had arrived, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. I had nothing left to say, nothing left to prove. I'd watched their arrogance rot from the inside, watched their laughter turn to panic, watched the same men who once mocked Mano, begging for crumbs of mercy. But mercy had already been spent years ago when I forgave their small cruelties, their forgotten birthdays, their careless words. What they did with that cake wasn't the beginning. It was the last straw on decades of quiet disrespect. And now every account, every key, every title had been reset to zero, not by rage, but by law. After the confrontation, I packed a small suitcase, just a few clothes, my old watch, and a single photograph. My late wife smiling, the only person who would ever see me fully. She'd always said, if they forget what you gave them, one day you must remind them. I had kept that promise, and now it was time to leave. Before sunrise, I stood at the door of the house. I looked around one last time, the chair by the window, the faint smell of old wood and tea, the walls that had heard every argument and every silence. I locked the door, placed the key under the mat, and walked down the steps. The air was cold and clean, the kind of morning that feels like forgiveness. A taxi waited by the gate. The driver, a young man with kind eyes, helped me with my suitcase. Where to, sir? He asked. Anywhere quiet, I said. He nodded and the car rolled forward. The road curved through the sleeping town, past the bakery where my story had begun, where I'd once bought a cake to share with sons who would later throw it away. The shop was dark now, closed for the morning, but the sign still shone faintly in the dawn. I smiled faintly. The past had a strange way of looping back, but this time it couldn't touch me. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want them to find me. They didn't deserve to. The bank knew to forward my pension to a quiet place up north, a cabin by the sea, far from the noise of inheritance and ego. I would spend whatever time I had left walking along the shore, feeding birds and watching the tide wash away footprints, just like time had washed away their laughter. By the time the sun rose fully, I was miles away. The city behind me looked small, like a painting of another man's life. In a way, it was the father who tolerated everything, who swallowed humiliation and called it peace. He had the night they threw that cake. The man who remained was quieter, colder, and finally free. I imagined their faces when they realized I was gone. The empty house, the locked gate, the silence that followed. Maybe they'd think I was dead. Maybe they'd finally understand what it means to lose. Someone who carried you, not financially, but morally. I didn't wish them harm. I wished them awareness. As the train carried me further away, I opened my notebook and wrote just one line. They took my kindness for weakness, my patience for permission, and my silence for surrender. So I left them with nothing, not to punish, but to teach. Outside, the sun rose fully, warm and indifferent. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch from the light. It's strange how quiet revenge can be. No fire, no shouting, no police at the door, just silence, clean, deliberate, and final. That's how I chose to end it. Not with a scene, but with a signature, not with a fist, but with a pen. For years, I thought love meant forgiveness. That age meant I had to endure. But But there's a difference between forgiveness and permission. And I'd given them permission to humiliate me for far too long. Sometimes I wonder if they remember that night. The way the frosting splattered across the floor. The way they laughed as if I were a joke. The way I stood there, quiet, holding a knife meant to cut a cake, not to defend my dignity. I can still see the crumbs, the candles flickering on the ground like little dying stars. That image followed me into every sleepless night. It burned behind my eyes until I learned to turn that humiliation into focus. And when focus turns cold, it becomes power. Now, when I wake, there's no noise, no one calling for money, no one asking for favors. The only sound is the wind brushing against the waves outside my window. The air smells of salt and peace. I make my tea slowly, the way I used to before they began to fill my life with chaos. I don't have much left, a cabin, a chair, and my dignity. But dignity is worth more than every dollar they ever took for granted. People say revenge doesn't heal. Maybe they're right. But it cleans. It clears Therat from the corners of your heart. It makes room for peace. I didn't ruin their lives. I only returned what was already theirs. Their greed, their disrespect, their blindness. I simply wrapped it all together and handed it back. And for the first time, they had to live with what they built. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, I imagine them standing together in that empty house, the rooms echoing with silence. No laughter, no servants, no music, just the ticking of a clock. Each second reminding them of what they threw away. Maybe one of them bends down to that same spot on the floor, tracing where the cake once fell, and realizes too late that the stain was not from icing, but from arrogance. I don't know if they'll ever find me. Maybe one day they will. Maybe they'll arrive at this quiet town and knock on my door again. This time with eyes that have seen humility. And maybe then I'll open it. Not to forgive, but to listen. Because forgiveness is not given, it is earned. And to earn it, they must first live the years I spent swallowing pride for their sake. I often think about my wife. What would she have said? I think she would have smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of hers, and whispered, "You finally remembered who you are." For a long time, I forgot. I let fatherhood turn me into a servant. But I was never weak. I was patient. And patience, when finally used, is unstoppable. This world forgets old men. It confuses gentleness with decay. But we are the ones who remember. We remember who signed the deeds, who built the walls, who carried generations on their backs. My sons learned too late that power is not in the shout. It's in the silence before the storm. They threw my cake on the floor and told me to eat it. I didn't. I left it there for them to step on. And now every step they take echoes with that same crunch. Final thought. They made my birthday a joke. I made their legacy a lesson. They laughed at my age. Now time itself laughs at